Hi, it's Alistair at Electric Scotland. This is a bit of an update on Brexit. I just want to explain why I think Brexit is really good for Britain and Scotland for that matter. And I've prepared a kind of bit of a talk which I want to read to you to try to give you some optimism that Britain is actually well placed to do really well outside of the EU. So without further ado, here's what I'm going to tell you. Britain excels in literature, music, filmmaking, fashion, broadcasting, publishing, visual arts, theatre, architecture, advertising, media and design. We're leaders in life sciences and academic research, and the second most popular university destination for international students. Britain boasts a rich ecosystem that works for companies interested in establishing or building a presence here that Silicon Valley can't offer. All the biggest US tech companies have decided to invest more in the UK since the referendum. 27 countries are now seeking UK trade deals. The total GDP of all of these countries is nearly $50 trillion, 67% of global GDP. In comparison, the EU's GDP of 16 trillion equates to just 22%. Adam Afric, MP, wrote an article, and I'd like to read it to you. He basically says, allowing the EU to continue dictating our trade policy would thwart our ambitions to embrace the world. As the Prime Minister's trade envoy to Ghana and Guinea, I have often been asked the same question by presidents, trade ministers and businesses. What are the opportunities for us now the UK is leaving the EU? Everyone recognises that free-flowing international trade is the best generator of jobs, wealth, health and opportunity known to mankind. With 90% of global economic growth predicted to come from outside the EU by 2050, I would have hoped that the immense opportunities of regaining the power to sign our own trade deals would now be a settled consensus. So I do worry that some hardened Remainers are finding it hard to even accept the immense opportunities that exist for British businesses to trade with countries outside of the EU. I suspect that it comes down to a bleak and mistaken belief that Brexit should only be judged only in terms of its costs, rather than as a balance between cost and opportunity. The financial geography of the world is undergoing a prolonged and dramatic change, which will see a new world landscape within a few decades from now. The economic transformation that has taken place in Africa and Asia since the 1970s shows no sign of slowing down, and the centre of gravity of world trade continues to shift further away from the EU every year. In 2017, the fastest growing economies were Bhutan, Ethiopia, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire and India. Uzbekistan, Myanmar and Tanzania are following close behind. It is crucial that we accept and adapt to these changes by using our newfound powers to sign deals, lower tariffs and mutually recognised qualifications with the rapidly growing markets of the future. So it comes as no surprise that even those countries held up as models of so-called soft Brexit have never considered signing away their ability to conduct trade deals. Switzerland, Norway and Iceland are all outside of the customs union. These countries, with their nimble and dynamic economies, have achieved remarkable success. Switzerland and Iceland have already signed free trade agreements with China, the second largest economy on earth and likely to surpass the USA in the near future. And the USA itself has signed 20 free trade agreements, all with smaller economies than the UK, and has signalled serious interest in signing a similar agreement with the UK as soon as we are free to do so. In fact, since the EU referendum, dozens of countries have signalled that they are keen to start negotiations with the UK for a free trade deal, including Brazil, South Korea, Japan, China, India, the USA, Australia, New Zealand and Canada. I'm particularly keen to see the UK make the most of our newfound powers to conduct trade negotiations with the rapidly rising economies of Africa. Just consider for a moment the industries where the UK has a comparative advantage. Financial technology, agricultural technology, the creative industries, and financial, professional and legal services, to name but a few. These are the kind of industries in which emerging economies are most likely to be demanding high quality services and expertise. There are unique opportunities to trade, support and mutually prosper with our friends and allies in Africa, where British goods and services have a reputation for quality and value, and our companies have a reputation for dealing honestly and fairly. It was British steel that laid the foundations for the first railways in Africa. Indeed, I have a framed picture in my office of the British-built first steam train in Ghana, and I very much hope it will be British companies and expertise that lay the foundations for the future railways in Africa. Regaining control of our ability to negotiate free trade agreements is not a choice. It is at the heart of respecting the referendum result. It is also the key to unlocking the door to a dynamic outward-facing economy. The cost of locking ourselves into the customs union would grow with every year. Only the naive would deny that leaving the EU customs union would require investment and determination to ensure that our ports are able to handle the EU customs checks post-Brexit. But it's well worth our effort, and I have no doubt at all that Britain can rise to the challenge. First, our existing customs system is already rated as being among the most efficient in the world by the World Bank. 98% of containers from outside the EU are cleared within 4 to 5 seconds. We start from an extremely good position. Second, technology is constantly transforming the customs process to make it cheaper and easier to clear goods. Shipments can be electronically cleared ahead of reaching customs, with only 1 to 4% of imports actually being inspected in intelligence-led operations to minimize disruption. Yet taking control of this particular area of policy goes beyond mere efficiency. It is the foundation of building a more open and outward-facing country, trading with the whole world rather than just Europe. A failure to regain our power to sign free trade agreements would not only be tantamount to locking ourselves out of prosperous world markets, but it would also prevent us from being the outward-looking, internationalist and free-trading country which most of us vote Leave supporters wanted to see. And as you well know, going through Parliament today, and it went yesterday and also today, the Lords have tried to wreck this Brexit process. And of course it's back in the Commons where, certainly day one seemed to be pretty good. We seem to get rid of most of their amendments. We'll see what happens today, of course. But I want you to remember that 52% of the electorate voted to leave the EU. This was the largest vote taken ever in the history of the United Kingdom. And I also want to just add to that, it is absolutely definite that outside of the EU, when we can handle our own tariffs and so forth, that food will definitely be cheaper and therefore will benefit the poorest in our society. And there are other elements that will also help the poorest in our society disproportionately to their benefit. So anyone arguing against Brexit is basically arguing that the poor should not be taken into account. The poor can remain poor so that the elites get their own way. I think it's disgusting, absolutely disgusting, when the poorest can be helped with cheaper food, cheaper footwear, cheaper clothes, cheaper all kinds of things. The poor will benefit the most from Brexit. So, if you're anti-Brexit, you're anti the poor. End of story. So I want you to think about these things, and I tell you, when it comes to Scotland, Scotland needs to think out of the box. They've got to start exporting more. That's where the focus must go. If you want to spend lots of extra money on, look at the Growth Commission. It's admitted that as independent Scotland that we're going to be worse off for 10 years at least. And if they got the figures wrong, it could be a quarter of a century before we start making any progress at all. What we need to do is export more. That's where the whole focus must go in Scotland, to export, both services and goods. And remember, 80% of Britain's exports are in services, not good, services. That's where our real strength lies. So, I hope by going through this that it shows that there's countries stacking out there in the world that are ready to do free trade deals with us. And if you think about the US, I would purport that Trump still wants to do a good deal with the UK. He can't do it until we're out of the EU. And the EU has a 50 billion surplus with trading with America. And that's where Donald Trump's looking at as a businessman. He's saying we've got to reduce that massive surplus that Germany and the EU are making from us. And China is making a huge profit out of dealing with America. So he's merely trying to readdress the balance. And I can well see that when we come out of the EU, he will start swinging great big tariffs onto the EU countries, which will not affect Britain because we'll be out of the EU by that time. So I think you've got to start thinking economically and the potential down the road. But with Africa becoming, it could be the bread basket for Britain. Because I think I've told you before that while the EU allowed tariff-free imports into the EU from Africa of coffee beans, they put a swinging big tariff on finished products. And it's the finished products that make the real profit for these countries. And Germany is making a fortune by keeping Africa down. And frankly, Africa, and its own, once it gets its political situation sorted out, could be one of the largest trading blocs in the world. And already the Commonwealth is the largest trading bloc in the world. And we're well positioned within the Commonwealth to do good deals with our Commonwealth friends. So to me, there's huge optimism for what can happen once we're out of the EU. And I don't really understand why people can't see that. The EU will be declining year on year with the world trade. It will be a declining part of the world. We have to get out. We have to go to where the growth is. And that's no longer the EU. I'm sorry, guys. It's no longer the EU. And as the Scottish independents wanting to belong to the EU, yes, they're perfectly happy for Brussels to have the decision over all of Scotland. But they don't want Westminster to have any decisions over Scotland. Makes no sense to me whatsoever. Take the named person scheme, for Pete's sake. Due to our incompetent judges who didn't see that the named person scheme was against the privacy laws of the EU, the Scottish judges passed it because of their ignorance and stupidity. And it took the Supreme Court of the UK to point out that it broke EU laws. Oh dear, because no one ever really explained how stupid our Scottish judges were. Just like this idea of Brexit going through in Scotland, and basically the Speaker for the devolved Parliament said he didn't think this was a legal agreement. and didn't think that the Parliament had the authority to decide that. But Sturgeon went ahead with it. Why did she go ahead with it? So that she could have it. She knows it's going to be forced down by the Supreme Court of the UK because it's illegal. But she's then got another wedge to say, look, Westminster has yet again told Scotland how to do things. It's all politically driven by her, and she gives you all the worst of everything that goes on. Where there's a lot to be proud of in how Britain's doing. I mean, since that Project Fear of the referendum, where 52% decided to ignore Barack Obama and ignore the financial forecasts of the Treasury about massive job losses and everything, it's been complete opposite since the referendum. We're more or less full employment these days. Our wages are starting to go up. I mean, investment in the UK has grown. Every aspect of Britain has improved since we voted to leave. So why are these blinking anti-Brexit people even being listened to? And don't forget that both Labour and Conservative ran on a political manifesto in the last election that we would come out of the EU, the customs union and the single market. So that's round on the plate. So now they're trying to wiggle out of it. I think that's just terrible. Okay, but I want to just reinforce to you, we've got 27 countries are seeking UK deals with us, and they represent 67% of global GDP. Wow, that's got to be great. So let's be more positive. Let's talk up Britain instead of putting it down all the time. And we're being bullied by these EU people. The so-called friends are bullying us. I mean, I've never given in to bullies in my life. I've always stood up to bullies, and I will stand up against the EU bullies for the rest of my life, and always. But if you want to give in and be wimps, and I mean, go right ahead, because that's you, and you're at fault. If you want to give in to bullies, you just give in to them. But I'll tell you this much, I'll never give in to bullies, and the EU is one hell of a bully. So there you go. That's my take on Brexit. A real positive for Britain, a real positive for Scotland, but we need to work at making it work for us. And certainly the opportunities are there, unbounded, and the poor will be better off under a Brexit Britain. Thanks for listening.